Recently, the development team of Drakerion TCG has posted a Kickstarter update detailing why they chose to implement card pull isolation in the game design. Card pull isolation is something I always thought great design at first glance and in the long run. But I've personally been experienced more games that I ended up leaving or disliking due to the card pull isolation. Just like everything else in our life, there is always good and bad. In this second episode of the series, let's take a look at controversial design decision, in my opinion, the card pull isolation. As in the first episode of this series, I am hoping this video guides you through the thinking process of card pull isolation as game design and see how it will be utilized in Drakerion TCG. So you can make your own decision if this aspect of the game fits your style or not. I will share my personal opinion, but that may be the least important part of this series. Let's get started. Card pull isolation refers to the fundamental game rule where there are discrete card pulls within the game. So when we build a deck in those games, there are cards that can never be in the same deck due to the game's core rule restriction. In Drakerion, card pull isolation is occurring at the level of kingdom or color. The game has a relatively standard 5-color plus no color system. So there are 5 discrete card pulls. The card pull isolation is a fairly common practice, but may be implemented in a few different ways. If a game has a rule such as you can only include one type of X card in a deck, that is one of the smallest form of card pull isolation. Set rotation system is a form of card pull isolation. For instance, Magic the Gathering's popular standard format rotates every 3 years. Analogous to Drakerion is card pull isolation within each set based on faction, color, or class-like. Some of the examples I know using this system are World of Warcraft TCG, Hearthstone, and Flesh and Blood TCG. The counterpart to the card pull isolation game is single card pull system. Here the game rule allows any card from any set can be included in any combination in a single deck, unless a card is banned, suspended, or restricted. Magic the Gathering's Legacy format is such an example. In spite of having the option of Legacy format, Standard format remains far more popular in a game like Magic the Gathering. This illustrates there is certainly merits of using card pull isolation system. Let's take a look at those merits. More cards means more options. The bigger is not always better here. Too many cards in the card pool can be overwhelming to some, especially new player. If you've ever had an experience joining established TCG after several sets, you know the challenge of learning new cards as well as financially to get those cards that you need. Here card pull isolation is very helpful. Let's say you've decided to join Drakerion a couple years down the road. With currently announced 300 cards in the first set, 150 in future expansions, and 3 sets per year plan, you will be looking at over 1,000 cards at that point. You may still need to learn many of these cards as you immerse into the competitive meta, but you won't necessarily need to completely familiarize yourself to all those cards. You just pick one of the 5 kingdoms that seems to be interesting to you, and start there. Ignoring non-affiliated, colorless cards, you are suddenly looking at only 200 cards in your card pool for building your own deck. This is helpful from the budget standpoint of view. Statistically speaking, the likelihood of unintentional synergy that may become a degenerate increase as the card pool grows over the time. Although the risk is generally higher with more cards, I think the real issue is allowing certain types of mechanics together. For example, recursion mechanics and the free card mechanics are risky game design space on their own, but they are hard to be called degenerate on their own. However, if recursion of a free card become an option, suddenly we are looking at red flag game design. Here, card pool isolation may be used to ensure above two mechanics are never happening in the same card pool. In the previous example, even though both recursion and the free card mechanics are a bit risky for potentially being overpowered, everything in the card game are contextual. Under the right context, both mechanics could be a very fun element. So having isolated card pool allows developer to implement them in a separate card pool and use them as a unique feature-defining element of each card pool. Essentially knowing certain interaction is never possible, design option to developer would be much wider. Deck building with different playstyle is one of the main appeal to the TCG genre. However, sometimes the playstyle variation may feel less noticeable to players when playing the game. I believe this happens due to convergence of card selections when making competitive level decks. What I refer to as intentional playstyle variation is one solution to this problem. Designers semi-force or aid players to make various types of playstyle deck within the game. Card pool isolation is one of the obvious ways to achieve this. For example, designer could make one card pool specifically for aggro archetype and the other card pool for control archetype. Independent of player's experience and deck building skill, picking a card pool allows the player to experience a particular playstyle intended or created by the game designer. This ensures the game environment always consists of multiple distinct playstyles. There is yin and yang for everything, so what are the potential drawbacks for card pool isolation? Let's take a look at construct and limited format separately. In construct format, there is a potential risk of intentional playstyle variation by designer pushed too extreme and end up being choosing a card pool bin equates to choosing the playstyle. At this point, players no longer have practical experience of deck building. Because independent of players' deck building skill or effort, essentially deck plays similar to all the others because playstyle was defined at the time of card pool selection. In such circumstance, the process becomes picking card pool and deck refinement, but no real deck building within such a game. Basically, if designer pushed too far, intentional playstyle variation could become playstyle restriction within each card pool. By its nature, limited format are card pool isolation system on its own. Adding another layer of card pool isolation result in smaller than designer's originally intended card pool size. When the card pool size becomes too small, limited format deck construction becomes just putting all cards allowed by the rule. Again, as a result, there is no real deck building element left in this situation. Furthermore, the part of draft strategies, such as signaling process, is also gone. You just need to pick as many same color cards as possible in this situation. Now, let's take a look at how card pool isolation is presented and affecting Drakerion TCG. Fortunately, as I prepare for this video, the development team has posted a Kickstarter update specifically addressing this topic. Additionally, I got one of the main missing information from the designer through the Discord. Let's take a look. According to the developer, the 5 factions were meant to keep the distinct identities. It was intended to not be able to mix them. Thus, each faction has its unique identity. You fight for your kingdom, you remain loyal to it, and you do naturally pick amongst the best cards in the game to stack them in a single deck. But why limit to 5? The balance of game is the permanent goal that drives the development team. 5 is what they consider to be the ideal number to achieve the goal. Such statement confirms that primary intent of carpool isolation is to create the gaming environment with intentional play style variance in mind. Now that we understand why the team has decided to use carpool isolation in Drakerion, let's take a look how their design address potential issues associated with carpool isolation. How is their design addressing playstyle restriction risk? In contrast to a game like Flesh and Blood TCG, where a number of card pool itself can expand, Drakerion team has decided to permanently remain at the card pool number of 5. The less number of card pools will increase number of cards within each card pool over the time, so the risk should be lower. The developer says, don't be afraid the game will become repetitive. Each kingdom has a rich history that will reveal to you gradually, allowing for many sub-themes within the same faction, each with its own unique mechanic, without preventing you from mixing several of these same themes for fun. This sounds like the development team is aware of the risk, and specifically stating we don't need to worry about it. One of the gaming elements allowing the game like Flesh and Blood card pool isolation system to be less restrictive and keeping all cards they release remain relevant is no set rotation. I was glad to hear that Drakerion TCG is also planning to take this approach. With number of card pools limiting to 5, Drakerion will eventually reach more cards in a single card pool than Flesh and Blood, even if they decided to release less number of cards per set. Initially, this is a great thing, because this means Drakerion will fill each kingdom more quickly, hence giving more playstyle variance with each kingdom. However, this also means Drakerion will see potential risk of Degenerate combo sooner due to more cards within each card pool. So how are they going to address this? I believe the answer lies on card subtype, which is a way to create a soft boundary within each kingdom. In fact, we already see this in currently revealed starter set. For example, Strike While the Iron is Hot only works on dwarf characters. Primeregion City counter only gets charged with Primeregion characters. In fact, the game has subtype on any card types including events, maneuvers, attachment, so I think the game design is built for future-proof with no set rotation system in mind. There's one little element of this design that makes me a bit wonder, is the team's decision of omitting default subtypes. The development team has confirmed that they will not be putting subtypes that they consider default. So we have fantasy world race such as dwarf, elf, skeleton as subtype, but not a human. Similarly, we will see captain, general, scout, but not a mage. Thematic consistency will suffer a little here, but it also means no grouping of these cards be allowed in the future expansion. For those who had played Magic the Gathering knows, race, trait, base deck are not for real competition, but certainly kitchen table setting, they are fun. Perhaps one of the main challenge with a game that uses card pool isolation within a set is the limited format. I really like Flesh and Blood and they are doing a fantastic job. I'm not a big limited format player myself, but I have heard multiple times even great Flesh and Blood players criticize about its limited format, especially when comparing to the Magic. This is certainly a major challenge Drakerion TCG will face. At the time of this recording, we do not have official detail about the limited format in Drakerion, but it is publicly announced that Drakerion intends to support draft format. Drakerion's pack size is 10. Assuming equal collation for each kingdom, there is max 1 to 2 kingdom card per pack. If we assume typical 8 people draft and a minimum 30 cards deck requirement, 3-pack draft simply won't work, because you need to pick the same kingdom card every pack on every single draft pick. One issue here is 10 cards pack is rather small number. Magic has practically 14 cards per pack. Flesh and Blood latest draftable set booster pack has 16 cards. Furthermore, Flesh and Blood has only 3 to 4 card pool bins per draftable set. Drakerion has 5. So purely based on the number, Drakerion draft won't work without different approach than conventional TCG draft. One simple answer here is just increase number of packs opened during the draft. In sealed format, 6 packs are used rather than 3 in both Magic and Flesh and Blood. However, if this is a sole solution to the card pool isolation issue in draft format, Drakerion's draft will be more restrictive than Flesh and Blood TCG, which is already more restrictive than the Magic the Gathering. So I reached out the game designer, what's the plan here? The designer's response was, players will be able to play different kingdoms thanks to special draft cards. City Banner. There we have it. This is the most elegant and a flexible solution. The developer will utilize its unique game design at full potential. It doesn't take much to infer that these special banner will be dual or someday even tri-kingdom. The double kingdom banner alone doubles the card pool size. Drakerion's banner having setup cards also adds some consistency in draft format. I can see this will create at least equivalent amount of draft variation as in the game like Flesh and Blood, and perhaps more potential depending on how far the designer here take those special banners and cities. Card pool isolation, when executed properly, and the game is designed from ground up with that in mind, I think it has more benefits than drawbacks. The main challenges are, of course, the longevity and frequency of the new expansion release, as in any other TCGs. But this is especially important for the card pool isolated card game in early game stage to maintain freshness of the game. Also, designers must be careful not having their intentional playstyle assignment to each card pool result in loss of players' deck building flexibility. Drakerion development team has decided to use card pool isolation in its game design with 5 distinct bins. From the construct format standpoint, without set rotation, fixed card pool numbers, along with widely prevalent subtype use, Drakerion seems to have a good game design foundation, other than my minor complaints of taking away human race deck potential. Most of their design decision and projected plan sounds in line with the team's goal of attaining all cards they release to have utility in both kitchen table and competitive environment. If your primary interest is draft format, the team is planning draft-specific banners and cities. Even though I am not a big fan of format myself, this actually excites me. This approach will make the draft environment to be entirely different from construct due to completely different setup card pool, hence new synergies to investigate. In conclusion, I am fairly optimistic that Drakerion's card pool isolation could work very well as long as the game can release new expansions as promised planned interval, and developers continue to strive to achieve their own set goals. In another word, if they can make everything as they are planning or promising, I think card pool isolation in this game will be a strength in 2 to 3 years. Thanks for watching.